Welcome to Would Be Better. My name is Mia Crawford and I represent the Federation of Swedish Family Forest Owners, and I have the pleasure to be guiding you through the next 1.5 hours together with
Kaisa Soropesonen, Swedish Forest Industries.
Today's webinar's topic is nature credits, from theory to transactions. And we will hear from the European Commission about their plans for nature credits, but also some reflections from the forest-based sector. But before we kick things off, I would like to tell you a little bit more about Would Be Better. Would Be Better is an EU network raising awareness of wood and the entire forest-based sector and its central role for circular and bioeconomy. The network is arranged jointly with the Federation of Swedish Family Forest Owners and the Swedish forest industry. And during this mandate period, our 4 Would Be Better hosts, are 4 Swedish members of the European Parliament. You see them here on the screen. And today's event was supposed to be hosted by Emma Wiesner from the Renew Europe. Unfortunately, Emma is sick today, but we have the pleasure to welcoming Anna Ek, who is our political advisor, so she will be joining us shortly. Once more, very much warm welcome to all of you for joining us today. Before we start our discussions, I will give the words over to Kaisa, who will give us a little bit more background on nature credits. Kaisa.
Thank you so much. So, the nature credit system is basically what we're talking about today. It is a proposal from the European Commission from this year, July. The Commission has an ambition to create let's say, a market-based tool to protect and restore and sustainably manage European ecosystems. And the idea of the credits is, simply put, I think, to mobilize private funding alongside with public funding for biodiversity and nature conservation. So there is a funding gap, significant funding gap, that the Commission has estimated. We have heard a number of 37 billion euros per year, but it might be significantly bigger, even double this amount. Then this amount is sort of supposed to be covered by private actors, so companies, investors, public authorities, who are then buying the credits and thereby supporting the European sustainability goals with their own funding. From our side, from the Swedish forest industries, our biggest ambition when it comes to the nature credit system is, of course, the absolute necessity to boost European bioeconomy. So we need to build a bioeconomy system which is a growth plan for Europe built on better competitiveness and resilience. So from this perspective, the nature credits really need to deliver dual benefits. So we need to have enhanced biodiversity, but also to ensure the supply of the renewable raw material. Because the healthy bioeconomy is really built on growing domestic wood in Europe. This in turn helps Europe to cut external dependencies, competitiveness, and the transition to a whole fossil-free society overall, which is our own, everybody's joint goal, you can say. So we need a flexible and result-based approach to achieve this. So basically, when it comes to biodiversity and the condition of nature, there's a huge differences between various regions and local conditions in around Europe. So we need to have a flexible system that really adheres to the local conditions and listening sufficiently to the landowners who usually know best their own area. So from our perspective, what we think is important is that the nature credit system sort of needs to ensure from beginning a broad representation of stakeholders. There has to be practical, scientific and industrial expertise involved to make this happen. Turning this policy into practice, it means also that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach for all of Europe. And then another thing to create a new market mechanism is of course that we need to make clear to the private operators what is the business case. So how can we clarify the incentives for the buyers of the nature credits? So we need to clarify which incentives exist and sorry, and how strong they are. So basically this is the discussion that we have today.
Yes, thank you, Kaisa. And now is high time to invite Anna Ek. Anna Ek is the political advisor to Emma Wiesner, and she will be delivering Emma Wiesner's opening address. Hello, Anna. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah.
And
Thank
sorry
you
to
for stepping
hear
in
about.
on such a short notice. We're very happy that you are willing to deliver Emma's opening address. Over to you, Anna.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, to everyone who's listening today, and of course, to the Federation of Swedish Family Forest Owners and to the Swedish Forest Industries for organizing this event. And once again, sorry for Emma not being here today. She sends her best greetings and will be listening to the seminar when she's feeling better. As you know, nature credits is not a new concept, depending on how you frame it. It's been sort of a buzz concept for many years, popping up in different policy areas to fill different roles. Not least linked to the carbon removal certification framework that Emma negotiated as shadow rapporteur last mandate. Or, for example, when discussing how to incentivize biodiversity actions in farming. However, the debate has taken a new turn since the Commission presented its roadmap this summer, and it has been an interesting discussion, to say the least. Coming from a liberal point of view, it is somewhat of a dream to make sure that one gets paid for the invisible values that you create, to internalize externalities, as an economist would put it. And as we all know, within the bioeconomy, there are countless examples of such externalities. In our point of view, nature credits has potential to create business cases in new sectors, but also help us make sure that we pay fair prices for all the values created by, for example, forest owners. With this mindset, nature credits creates an opportunity well worth exploring. But of course, there are risks as well. And this seminar to us will help us explore both the added values or the opportunities within nature credits, but hopefully also express or answer to some of those risks that we see. This is also an opportunity for us, and it is our strong belief that we as Swedes need to set the scene for this continued discussion. This is a topic where Swedish knowledge and know-how will be needed, and we hope that we can help regulators to not fall into those usual potholes when it comes to forestry or bioeconomy at large. I look forward to learning together with you guys today, and I hope that our listeners will as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for raising some of the opportunities, but also some risks that you see with the nature credits. We will hear more from you towards the end when we wrap up. And Emma, if you're watching this, I hope you will get well soon. We will now turn to Kaisa and our commission.
Yes, so now it's time for our panel. Our first panelist that we are very happy to welcome today is Axel Hellman. Axel works as a member of cabinet of the European Environment Commissioner Jessica Roosevelt, who is responsible for environment, circular economy and water resilience in the current European Commission. So welcome, Axel. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today.
Sure. Thank you, Kaisa.
Hey, we are very eager to hear everything about the Commission's roadmap and the thinking behind this. So please, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, and thank you so much. Thank you also to Mia and to Anna for those opening remarks. I'm glad that you're excited to hear what I have to say, but I also want to start by saying that I'm equally excited to hear what you have to say, because I think, as I will explain in these introductory remarks, the roadmap that we published is a bit different. As you know, it's not a legal proposal, but it's a starting point of a journey. And that journey will require us to work very, very closely with stakeholders such as you. So just from the excellent introduction you gave and the welcoming remarks from Anna, I already have a long list of notes, and I hope we get a chance to discuss that. But it's really nice to be here. It's fantastic to be at Would Be Better. And thank you for inviting me as a speaker to represent the Commission. This is a topic that we are hugely excited about, and I'm really glad to see that there is such a broad interest out there for this. Now, I've been asked to give you all an update on what we in the European Commission are doing on nature credits and how we see the next steps in this work. And I won't speak for too long because, as I said, I'm looking forward to a conversation and hopefully answering some questions. But I will give you just a short introduction, and I will focus on three things. First is I want to give you a bit of a political and economic context in which we started thinking about nature credits. I think that's important for understanding this paper. And second, I will give you a short overview of this roadmap that we published this summer, as you said. And finally, and most important, I will talk a little bit about what you all can do to help us in this work. So if we start with the political context, I think most of you who are listening are in one way or another involved in European politics. So you will all be aware of the current political priorities and the importance that we in the Commission are putting on economic growth, strengthening our security, and improving our overall resilience as a society. And we often get the question of where nature and environmental policy fits into all of this, because we know that these are issues that people care greatly about. And our answer from our side, and what you will hear Commissioner Roosevelt always saying, is that all of this works together. If we want to create the right conditions for long-term growth and a more resilient society with less dependencies, then we need nature and we need a healthy environment. And I'm using this as a starting point because I think it's important to make the point that environmental policy is not a separate or sort of disassociated area of politics, but rather instrumental to everything that we want to achieve. And I think that this is also the reason why our policies, whether it's the nature protection, circularity, or the bioeconomy, as you touched on in your introduction, are so firmly anchored in the economic and industrial strategies that the Commission has presented in everything from the Competitiveness Compass to the Clean Industrial Deal. So we know that the environment is crucial for our policy. So then the question is, how do we manage it in the best possible way? Well, first of all, we have a very robust legal framework in the EU. And now, as you probably know, we are taking steps to make sure that the rules that we have are up to date, fit for purpose, and easy to follow through. And we're doing this through our big push on simplification. We also have one of our greatest assets, I would say, which is a community of European farmers and land managers who are deeply committed to managing their land responsibly, both today but also for future generations, the long-term perspective that you were alluding to also in the beginning. And finally, we have a business community that are acutely aware of the risks of deteriorating ecosystems. I think some interesting figures have come out from the European Central Bank that says that about 70% of all businesses operating in the Eurozone are dependent on at least one ecosystem. And it gives you a bit of a sense of the clear link between nature and the economy. So there is a clear case for investing in nature, but unfortunately, at least historically, the business case has been less clear. So ecosystem services are difficult to monetize, and they haven't really been reflected well in market price signals. And the result is that nature investments has mainly been paid by the public purse. And let's be clear, public money is the cornerstone of nature funding, and it will remain a cornerstone of nature funding. And for example, the EU has committed to dedicate 10% of our budget in 2026, 2027 to support biodiversity measures. And we have also increased our funding commitments for global commitments. But we also need to be realistic. And even with these clear budgetary commitments from us and our international partners, it will be very difficult to fill the gap. And Kaisa addressed this in the beginning. We need a lot of money for investments. And we know that there are a number of priorities that will put pressure on the public budgets, whether they are European or national budgets. And so we have to be much more creative about how we think in terms of mobilizing more capital, including from private sources. And we need to be much more innovative. And this finally brings me now to the concept of nature credits. So the basic idea about nature credits, and again, we got some pointers to this in the introduction, is that if we can create a powerful incentive to make investments in nature, and at the same time offer meaningful income opportunities for farmers and other land managers, and if we can create some kind of credible system for all of this, I think it could be really, really meaningful. And President von der Leyen said last year that we need to put nature on the balance sheet. And I think that's a really important signal, not to treat nature as a commodity, but to acknowledge its strong economic value. And so the overall case for nature credits is clear. And the question then is, how do we do this in practice? Well, from our side, we thought long and hard about this, and we evaluated a number of options. And to be honest with you, a key question that we had was what the role of politics, or what the role for the European institutions and policymaking should be. We could do a regulation or start by setting up a legal framework, but would that really be the best option? And we're not convinced. So instead, we settled on this roadmap that we're going to talk about, which we presented this summer, and which takes much more the shape of a bottom-up approach. And so we really start with the basics. And I think the best way to describe it is as laying the ground for a framework in which nature credits can be developed, not mainly as a political product, but as a market-based tool. So in this document, the roadmap, we flesh out the concept of nature credits, we lay out the business case for it, and we present a two-step approach for their development. The first is the need for some kind of commonly agreed upon criteria, or a certificate that an action is actually positive for nature. And as a second step, based on those criteria, you can create this credit, which represent a positive action. And that can then be traded and generate incomes. So this is our sort of thinking in a nutshell. And as you can tell, we have a lot of work to do to develop this system. And so before I end, I just want to make two short points. The first is that we're not operating in a vacuum. Anna made some references to this. There's a lot of really interesting work going on internationally and in Europe, both in terms of pilot projects. We have some in Sweden, we have some across Europe, we have some interesting ones in South America, for example. And we also have some international and multilateral systems. The International Alliance for Biodiversity Credits, for example, are doing really interesting work on this. And we're looking at that very, very carefully to align ourselves with that work. And second, and crucially, is that, as I said, we can't do this alone. Again, we think of this as a bottom-up, market-based approach. It's not about imposing policy, but rather to build on active engagement from land managers, businesses, investors. So before we presented the roadmap this summer, we convened a large roundtable conversation here in the Berlaymont with farmers, forest owners, NGOs, businesses, and banks to exchange ideas. And the first big step that we're taking under this roadmap is to put together an expert group with stakeholders to help us develop everything from standards to sort of the infrastructure for the trade. And I hope that we can talk a little bit more about this later. So I hope that if you're interested in this issue, and whether you're extremely positive or negative, or if you fall somewhere in between, that you get in touch with us, because we're very, very eager to hear your voice too. So thank you very much, and I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Axel, and thank you so much for joining us from your beautiful offices, my lovely old workplace, the Berlaymont. Look, I would like to ask you, I don't know if you're able to answer this, but I still want to ask you, what would you say? Can you elaborate a bit on the, let's say, what's the thinking? I mean, the relationship between the other credits, the carbon credits, and maybe also the carbon removal and carbon farming framework, and the new nature credits. Are they going to be all interlinked, or what's your thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Again, I think this is something that Anna raised earlier, the existing legal framework that we have on carbon. I'll make kind of two initial points. we have tried to look at the existing system for carbon and to really learn from it, because I think there are some really useful experiences to be drawn. A lot of positive ones. I think that this is in some ways a success story, but we've also seen over time that there have been some unintended consequences sometimes. So we can also draw from the less positive aspects of the development of these tools, and so we're really trying to take that into consideration. Now, one way is to look at the CRCF, for example, so the carbon removals thing. And I think that there are some of those even in the existing legal framework that we have that talks about biodiversity positive actions. And so I think that's a clear link to the work that we're trying to do here. So we are currently looking at that and thinking about, well, is there any way that we could link these two systems so that, for example, as a farmer or a land manager, that if you do something that is positive both for sort of nature biodiversity but also for carbon removals, well, can you be compensated for both of that? I think that would be great if that was possible. But there is one thing that I think we need to acknowledge, which is very important for us. When it comes to carbon and CO2, I'm not saying that it's easy, because there's also usually complex instrument, but we know quite well how to measure carbon and how to measure CO2. We have sort of a system for it in CO2. When it comes to biodiversity nature, in some ways it's much more complex. Nature types are usually different across Europe and within countries. I mean, Sweden is one example. So you have a boreal forest in Sweden, and you have a wetland in France, and you have a third ecosystem somewhere in Spain. They will be very, very different. And so it's difficult to create one unitary system that will sort of encapsulate all of them. So I think that when we talk about the nature credits, we need to take a much more regional and sometimes even a local approach to really capture the benefits. And that's why I think that at least initially we will have to think a bit more kind of small scale about the nature credit system than the CO2.
Thank you. And we like to hear your last remark there, particularly, of course, about the local and regional flexibilities. Thank you so much, Axel. Now it is time to go forward in our panel. Mia.
Yes, thank you, Kaisa. And we will now turn to Jessica Nordin. We will hear some reflections on what we've heard on nature credit from the forest-based industry. And Jessica Nordin is the head of sustainability at Södra, which is one of the forest associations that we have in Sweden, with more than 52,000 forest owners as members. And they also have a large forest industry. And so they are a large forest company in Sweden. Jessica, warm welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this webinar. As Mia said, we are a large forest owner association here in Sweden. And I would first like to give a short introduction to Södra, because it explains kind of why we are interested in nature credits. As Mia said, we have an industry structure, of course, but our mission from our members is to refine and renew the values of our members' forest estates, and which we do by offering forestry services, our industry structure, and by investing heavily in the development of new products with low carbon footprints based on the forest resource. All our members, you can take the next slide, please. All our members have different goals for their management of their forest, and this is quite important to understand. A good economy is, of course, important, but family foresters don't only make rational financial decisions in their forest management, but their interest for other values like biodiversity, like hunting and recreation, impact their decision making. And today their main income comes from timber production. But of course there is a great interest among our members in opportunities to get a revenue from other values of the forest as well. Next slide, please. And now we're in a stage to develop a framework for certification for nature credits. And this could be a successful tool to close the funding gap. And in that context, I would like to lift examples we have with the forest certification scheme, FSC and PEFC, as two good examples of market-driven certification that have added a lot of value in the Swedish context. Since the late 90s, when forest certification schemes were introduced in Sweden, voluntary set-asides for nature conservation have expanded dramatically. Today, the area of productive forest land set aside voluntarily by forest owners is of a similar magnitude to the area formerly protected by the state. And this is not a marginal gesture, it's a private investment in biodiversity made by thousands of private forest owners and companies who manage their land for both production and conservation. And this is, of course, a very important contribution to Swedish national conservation targets. The question now is whether other type of companies are prepared to join forest owners in financing nature. And with the right mechanism in place, forest owners could, of course, be encouraged to perform additional measures that further strengthen biodiversity. You could take the next slide, please. But it is important to understand that a certification scheme does not alone create a market. There must be a demand. And SADA has participated in the initiative Swedish Biocredit Alliance, which has developed a standard for biodiversity credits managed in managed landscape. And this is meant to work as a framework to secure quality and transparency for both buyers and sellers by requirements on third-party certification and additionality, among others. And we have experienced a great interest in this work among potential buyers. But at the same time, they have difficulties to understand their business case by investing in biodiversity credits. And I would say that the key for a functioning market for nature credits to evolve is that the business understand their impact and dependencies. As Axel said, 70% of the companies in Europe are dependent on one ecosystem services at least. But I think there is maybe a little bit of lack of understanding these connections, because at SADA we've had an active nature conservation work for more than 30 years because we have a very direct impact on biodiversity. But it's not the individual forest owners that drive the loss of biodiversity, it's the whole society with our consumption of natural resources that drives the loss of biodiversity. And this is an indirect impact. And when you understand your impact and dependencies, then you identify it as a sustainable matter. And then a company makes commitments, set targets, and make action plan. And in that context, nature credits could be one tool to contribute to strengthen biodiversity. However, I experienced that many companies with this indirect impact have not yet fully understand how their business models affect biodiversity and how the use of biodiversity credits can strengthen their business. And then you lack the driving force to invest in biodiversity. Next slide, please. Finally, I have some key messages from my point of view. To unlock a nature credit market, I think it's really important to define the business case. Potential buyers need to see how biodiversity investments create financial benefits, and this could be risk mitigation, revenue opportunities like premium products with biodiversity claims, or strengthen brand and market values. Secondly, a market for nature credits that requires sellers and buyers, and then it's important to engage both parts in the design of the certification schemes, since it must deliver attractive solution for both parts. And therefore, I think it's great to hear that now when we're looking at creating this framework for nature credits, we have this bottom-up approach, as Axel mentioned. The EU Nature Credit Initiative should also align with the existing markets and projects by providing a common framework and transparency platform, while we should leave the methodologies, pricing and transaction terms to market actors. First, there is a lot of good work already done, and it's important to take advantage of this knowledge. And secondly, we have very different challenges in Europe when it comes to biodiversity, which means that I think that methodologies are best developed on a national level, but of course in consistency with a European common framework. And finally, first, I also think it's important to avoid overly detailed regulation. I think it's important to have that in mind, because that creates a heavy administrative burdens for landowners, and this could reduce participation and hinder market development. New biodiversity funding must deliver real conservation benefits, not be consumed by heavy administration costs. And finally, balance biodiversity and bioeconomy. Nature conservation and a developed bioeconomy are sometimes described as contradictory, but we have a lot of forest land we don't use for timber production of different reasons, and the focus for nature credits should be on preserving land with very high nature conservation values and to uplift nature conservation values on land we don't use for production. It should not steer against preserving land with low or trivial values. That I would say is most efficient from a nature conservation perspective as well as a climate perspective. Thanks. I think I stop there.
Thank you, Jessica. I have a follow-up question. You had in your presentation showing some quite remarkable results that has been achieved by your members through the certification schemes, the existing ones that we have at the moment for sustainable forest management. What do you see sort of as the additional value of nature credits, and how to measure these credits? Could you expand a little bit on this, please?
I think the additional value, I mean, the forest certification schemes, I think, have been a very successful story, especially here in Sweden, where we have so many certified forest owners. But it's a certification scheme for responsible forest management, so it's broader than a certification scheme for nature credits could be or should be. So I think a certification scheme for nature credits, they have the focus on biodiversity and really lift, enlighten how biodiversity could be an asset in itself. Now, there are very few opportunities to, financial benefit from biodiversity, and I would really love that biodiversity is something that forest owner sees as an asset instead of here in Sweden. Sometimes it's more considered as a risk because you risk getting restriction in how you manage your forest without any financial compensation for that. So I think it would really good to get incentives where biodiversity becomes an asset.
Thank you.
But
yes.
then you were talking about measurement. I agree with Axel. It's really difficult to measure biodiversity. It's a challenge, and that is the reason why we should develop methods for metrics on a national or regional level.
Yes, thank you. I think it was a good message there about seeing biodiversity as an asset rather than a risk, and also leaving more at the national or regional, even locally, for the different measurements that needs to be measured. I do wanted to ask you one more thing, more regarding this bottom-up approach, which we heard from Axel, and we now have an expert group which will have its first meeting next week. And Södra, it's not you, Jessica, but it's one of your colleagues who are going to be participating in this. What do you think will be your expectation with this bottom-up approach? How, with such a large number of stakeholders and different regional perspectives, to form this framework? Do you have any thoughts and ideas from your side about how to approach this?
No, I think it's really good with this bottom-up approach, because as I pointed out at my presentation, I think in order for a market to evolve and a market to scale up, then we need to find solutions that are attractive for both landowners and for potential buyers. And in order to that, we really need to have this broad engagement of different kind of stakeholders. And of course, it's also crucial that we create a system that is credible and trustworthy, and that the public in general and NGOs trust in and believe in. So it's truly important with a broad engagement of different stakeholders. But I also, one of my key messages, as I said, we have experience in working with biocredits. And as I said, we do experience that potential buyers have not yet fully understand how they can use nature credits or biodiversity credits and how it is connected to their business model. So I think in the beginning of this work, it's really important to understand the driving forces for potential buyers, what could make them invest in biodiversity. It is not enough to just emphasize that there is a funding gap. We must be able to connect the purchase of biodiversity credits to the specific businesses.
Thank you, Jessica. We will now actually follow up on this, because I think this business case, making the business case is very important. And we will now bring back Axel to have a bit of a discussion between the two of you. And so, Kaisa, you will be asking the first question.
Yes. So welcome so much back to our panel. Actually, I have a first question that I would like to address to Axel, if that's okay with you. Axel, Jessica talked about unlocking the market here. And this, I know, has also been the ambition of the European Commission in the new bioeconomy strategy. I'm interested because in the European Commission's strategy that you proposed here not very long ago, was it last week? Yes. You're proposing something called the EU Buyers Club to boost the market for demand for nature credits. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about this initiative.
Yeah, first of all, I think Jessica's remarks were excellent, and she pointed to a couple of things that are extremely important, and one of them is this business case. I think, I explained the bigger perspective, the clear business case for investing in nature and why it's needed on sort of the macro scale. As I alluded to, and as Jessica really described well, is it gets harder when you try to narrow it down and look at the individual specific business cases for a company or a financial institution. If you go back and look at the earliest examples of where nature credits have been used and where we really see some innovative uses of investments in biodiversity, there are clear cases. In New York, for example, in the 1990s, to reduce the risk of flooding in the Hudson River, instead of investing in traditional kind of gray infrastructure, they actually invested in restoring wetlands kind of upstream. which was way cheaper than building this traditional infrastructure. And it also had a net positive biodiversity and nature protection effect and reduced the risk of floods. So in cases like that, you have a clear economic case because it can be cheaper. And you also have a clear economic case because you can reduce the risk of floods, which of course, if you're a property developer or an insurance company, that has a clear economic added value too. So there are very clear cases, but I think that what we need to do with this expert group and what we need to think really, really hard about is that how do you make the cases to specific individual companies that this is actually in their interest? And I think part of the answer is what we just discussed, which is to have it on the local level for all the reasons we discussed. Now, that is good, but I think one of the risks is real with that is that once you go down to the local level, I think we're mainly going to talk about smaller projects. And some of the really good examples that we have today, there are some really exciting examples in Finland, for example. They have been hugely beneficial, but they're also quite small. So when we talk about the market, I think in one way there's an inherent limit to this. What we can do with this buyers club, I think, is to maybe aggregate that demand and create some kind of scale in this market that for the specific reasons that pertaining to all the differences we talked about will be more limited in CO2. So I really see this, and I hope that this can be a way to really boost demand and get a bigger market for what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Jessica, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I can make a short comment. I think, I mean, it's good to try new things. So I'm positive to this idea of a European Buyers Club, and of course, it's good to gather potential buyers. But I guess still, I would say in the end, you really need to understand what will be the driving forces for potential buyers then to engage in this buyers club. So what would be the driving forces? I think we need to understand it, and I think we need to make it easier for companies to understand their indirect impact and to understand how we can use how they can use nature credits to strengthen their business and their company.
Thank you. Now we go to the next question, I think.
Yes. So, Jessica, in your presentation, you talked quite a bit about the need for local adaptation and more regional and national approaches to nature credits, and that the measure for biodiversity varies so much across the EU. Do you really see, I would like to understand a little bit more from you how you see this to be done in practice, and also whether do we actually need something more overall at the EU level, or should this be built very much a bottom up and perhaps remain and stay at more of a national or regional approach? Could you tell us a little bit more how you see this could actually work in practice? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have like a European common framework for certification for nature credits, so that we all agree on the same principles and so on. But when I talk that we need to have regional or national adaptation, I think it's because I see that we have different challenges connected to biodiversity. We have different needs. For example, here in the southern part of Sweden, where we operate in, there is many of the nature conservation values depend on active management because they have evolved from a small scale management. So we have half open grazing land. We have deciduous forests that need active management because otherwise spruce will outcompete deciduous forest and so on. So a lot of our nature conservation values are dependent on active management. So of course we see that it would be great to get incentives to and finance for increase our active management where we see a lack of fundings. And I think in different parts of Europe, we have different challenges. So it's therefore, I think, a common framework where we agree on overall principles and it creates this credibility for the system. But then we need to develop methodologies to create nature credits on a more national, regional level, and then they're gonna connect to this framework.
Thank you. Axel, I wanted to ask you this question as well, but maybe frame it a little bit differently. So we hear now from Jessica, she's talking about a more of an overarching framework with perhaps methodologies being developed more at the national or regional level. But you mentioned in your initial presentation that this overall framework should maybe be based on criteria, and from Jessica we now heard principles. Could you explain a little bit more what kind of criteria do you really mean?
Well, thank you. And I think that Jessica and I are quite closely aligned on this because someone, I think it was Jessica, mentioned balance in her initial remarks. And I think that's the key word here. On the one hand, let's remember what we're trying to do. First of all, we're trying to create a market where people participate in a voluntary scheme to trade these things, right? So you need to have a strong incentives from both the one doing the action and the one buying the action or paying for it to really engage in this. Otherwise, the whole thing just won't work. And that means that on the one hand, as Jessica pointed out, if we have something that is too prescriptive, if it's too detailed, and if it's too kind of general, I think it simply will not work because a lot of potential market participants will probably look at that and say, well, the idea is great, but we have all these difficult rules to abide by, and they're not really tailored to the specific plot of land that I want to engage with. And so it's just not worth doing it. And that's a risk, right? We lose those market participants. On the other hand, if you're the one who's interested in funding this, if you're willing to put money down to make a meaningful contribution to nature, of course, you need some kind of guarantee, if you will, that this is actually useful. Again, you don't just want to put money into something that kind of goes wherever, right? And that requires what I call the shared understanding for what a nature positive action is. So if we don't have that, well, we risk losing those market participants too. And we need both of them. So I think it means that we need some kind of criteria or principles. I think when I say criteria, people might be scared and might say, okay, now that we're going to do a detailed sort of regulation from the EU on exactly how to do this. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that that is the answer. Maybe principles is a better word to use. But I think the key thing is that we need some kind of certificate where we have a shared understanding in great enough scale between buyers and sellers to say, okay, we agree that this is a positive action and that I'm willing to do it and that I'm willing to pay for it. And I think the balance, of course, is to strike that, but I think it's very important to have it.
Okay, so no details about what these principles or criteria could look like?
Not at this stage, no. And I mean, I guess going back to what I said in the beginning about this bottom-up approach and the method we chose, which is this roadmap, I think the good thing is that we can have this very open conversation to actually start developing the work together. The negative side, of course, is that compared to a legal proposal, I can be much less precise in what we are planning because we haven't proposed this as any kind of legislation, but rather this is one of the issues that we're now putting on the agenda for the group that will convene, one of the questions that we're discussing together with the stakeholders and with the other institutions to really see what works best.
Thank you. We look forward to that work. And Kaisa, you have another question.
Yeah, maybe Axel, you can hang in there online. It sounds very much like, as always, the devil is in the details. And when it comes to biodiversity, I think we all agree that we're dealing with huge complexity and regional differences across Europe. But I wonder if you've been thinking about another thing. There's not only the criteria for how the credits can be sort of made such that you can, for instance, compare credits from Northern Europe with credits from Southern Europe, but you also have another aspect to think about here, perhaps, is the timing. For how long will the credits remain valid? What happens if and when the land ownership changes, if there is, for instance, a generational shift? This is, of course, something which is important for the investors to, as you know, normally when you invest in forest, for instance, it is a very long-term investment, often even exceeding our lifetime. So would you
No,
have any
absolutely.
comments on that?
Yeah, and I mean, this is spot on. I had a meeting this morning talking about exactly what you mentioned now, forest management and linked to the nature restoration laws, where one of the points was made that, well, it takes time. And when it comes to managing forests in particular and sort of restoring certain nature types, I mean, we're talking about years and years and years. So this is ongoing, long-term, complex processes, and we're very well aware of that. I think what your question relates to, at least in part, is this idea of conditionality or effort-based versus results-based approach. Maybe this is just my reading of the question, but I think that is an important part of it, because there too, I think we really need to find the balance. On the one hand, again, taking perhaps the land manager's perspective, you want to make sure that, well, if I'm committing to doing something on my land, whatever that action might be, if you're a farmer, it might be, keeping some land for, growing certain crops that are beneficial for, birds or other kinds of biodiversity. Well, if you do that, you want some kind of guarantee that you're going to get the cash that you were promised, right? On the other hand, if I'm on the other side and I'm the one paying for it, I want some kind of guarantee to say that, well, it's not just a nice intention. I actually want to see the result. And I think that is, at least in my view, and I'm honest here, one of the really difficult difficult issues that we really need to discuss, including with the stakeholders. And the balance, of course, is somewhere in between. But ultimately, we need a solution where both market participants can agree on it, and the time perspective is part of that. Now, I answered your question, but I also answered it by posing even more questions, and I'm sorry for that. But it shows that this is something that we're taking extremely seriously and that we're really looking carefully at.
Thank you so much. What about the private investors? Jessica, do you want to comment on this last bit from?
No, I think I agree with Axel a lot, because it is a challenge when it comes to biodiversity if it's going to be result-based or effort-based, because things we do today, we know through science and evidence, it's likely good for an increased biodiversity. But nature, you can't decide over nature, so you never know when the species will come or arrive, and the species are received on that we have done a successful conservation management measure. So I think, and most often it takes time, and somewhere, I mean, you need to get a return on the investment you're doing if you're doing active management to increase biodiversity. So it might be difficult to wait until you actually have the species on the spot. So I think we need a combination of maybe result-based and effort-based. And then I agree, of course, that potential buyers, they need a credible system. They need to know what their investment is resulting in. So it's really important to get this trustworthy system on place.
Okay, so if I may come in with just a quick reaction to that. Again, without preempting anything, I think one thing we could think about as a potential solution would be some kind of ladder when you think about these schemes, right? So you could imagine a scenario in which you have a buyer that says, I want to pay for this nature positive action over here, and there's a down payment of X euros just for undertaking the action, and then there will be a premium, so another X amount of euros if we achieve these results, and then a third installment once we see that these results are lasting over a certain period of time. It could possibly be difficult to construct that system, but I think it could create a framework in which you can say, as the farmer, for example, okay, I know that there's a minimal payment I will get just by doing the good thing, and then the premium gets paid if it has specific effects. So I think that is something we can think about.
I would like to, if I may interrupt here, I would just like lift an important forest owner perspective as well, because now when we're talking about when it delivers nature conservation benefits, we have also this challenge that, okay, the landowner decides, I want to make nature credits from this area. I start by doing these management measures. I get some payment from the beginning, and in a few years, if it develops like our intention, I will get a more another payment. But the challenge is that you need to know that there will be a buyer in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years as well, because otherwise the forest owner has made this investment and made this commitment, but it's kind of a risky investment because you don't know if you will have buyers when the area starts to deliver conservation outcomes. So I think this is also something important to address when you're starting to look at this what we call permanence, how long permanence, what will happen, because most companies, I mean, the forest sector are quite special because we plan for a very long future. We plant the seedlings today for something that will grow up and be able to harvest in 80 years. So we are like have a very long perspective in our business, but there are very few business, other types of business that have this very long-term perspective. And I would say, I don't know, but maybe will not be ready to make a commitment for 10 or 15 or 20 years ahead when we will actually start to see the result of an investment in nature conservation.
Thank you, Jessica. We have maybe building on this. This nature credit can be criticized on one hand, be seen there's a risk of greenwashing, but also on the other hand, you have this risk that you just mentioned now, that there's investments that the forest owners or the landowners have to take, and it's also been saying this is nature credits is the solution to finance nature restoration regulation and other environmental regulation that the Commission has come out to. How do you see that we develop a nature credit system that are on one hand not seen as greenwashing, but on the other hand, not putting the burden and the risk on the landowners? How would we find this balance? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, of course. We don't want greenwashing, not at all, because then the market for nature credits will be very short, definitely, and will not ever scale up. So the perspective on additionality is, of course, important, and then you have to look at additionality, and I think you have to look at each area and evaluate what kind of uplift in nature conservation values can you contribute to this area. So we need specific guidelines and help to agree on what kind of additionality we should have. The second question, you had another, could you remind me, please?
Yes, I mean, there is also a risk that in order to meet the measurements and the requirements in nature restoration regulation or other environmental regulations, that this is seen as a way to finance this rather than perhaps other funding, and that a lot of the majority of sort of the risk of this is actually put on the landowners.
Yeah, I think of course that would be a risk, and I would as I said before, I mean, it's not the individual forest owners that drive the loss of biodiversity, it's the whole society with its consumption. And I think we really should take the opportunity to try to release funding from other parts of the society now, because the landowners already today, they invest heavily in biodiversity. If we look at our certified members, they set aside about 8% of their forest land for nature conservation purposes. And I would say that if all companies in Europe invested 8% of their assets in biodiversity, we would not have any funding gaps. So I think we can't expect, I mean, landowners are already doing a lot for preserve and strengthen biodiversity, and we should encourage this work by establishing incentives to continue this work, and we can't take this work for granted. But we should focus to see how we can find financial sources from other parts of the society instead of increasing the expectations of the forest owners.
Thank you, Jessica. I want to be quite a direct question to you, Axel. How do you respond to those who say that nature credits is Commission's way of financing nature restoration regulation and other environmental regulations? What do you say to this?
Well, I disagree. I think it's part of the solution, but not the full solution. And going back to what I said way in the beginning in my initial remarks, we need public money. The financing need is huge, and I think that we need public money to pay for it. That's what we're doing now, and I think that in the current budget, as I mentioned, we have a large envelope promoted for nature investments. And also, and this is of course subject to negotiations now with the Parliament and the Council, in the next MFF proposal that the Commission published, we have earmarked a significant amount of money for investments into climate and the environment. So my point is that public money is needed, and it's going to be needed. It's probably always going to be needed, and that's good. But at the same time, we also need to see the reality, and the financing gap is substantial, and we have a lot of demands on the budget. And so I think, again, we need to look at complementary tools, not to replace public money, but to complement it. And I think that is really important. And I've heard similar questions before, which is kind of reflecting a concern to say that, well, this is a way of getting away from the commitments to use public money. And that is not the thinking that we have. It's a complement and not a substitute. That said, just one second point in terms of the additionality, I guess you could call it, which Jessica mentioned outright, and I think you're alluding to it. Where there is a legal obligation on an individual company or a person or a landowner to do something that is related to biodiversity, well, that's a legal requirement. That's of course something that you have to do, and I don't think that in those cases nature credits is the solution. But when we have something like the nature restoration regulation, which sets requirement on a member state level for member states to themselves design national plans on how they think that this can be implemented, yes, then nature credits can play a role. And I think that the way to think about it is as a complement to public money and a way to offer a meaningful new income stream to those that will have to or want to willingly take some of these actions.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both Jessica and Axel. We will now move back to Anna. We will bring back Anna to the screen to have some closing remarks for us. Anna, are you with us?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for the great remarks from the rest of the panel.
Yes, Anna. So now we've heard from Axel from the Commission about the plans and also some reflections from Jessica from the more forest industry and forest-based sectors perspectives. What are some of your takes from this discussion?
Well, I must say that I have a lot of thoughts after listening to the other panelists. And first of all, let's say that a lot of those thoughts or a lot of those points of views that they've shared, I also have, especially when we're thinking about how to support a growing market or a potential market without disrupting already existing initiatives, and when scaling up, who is the big buyer? And I think that's a question that everyone is asking themselves right now. How can we unlock that potential? And how can we make sure that we have a buyer for nature credits? And I think that the remark from Jessica on the indirect impact and the companies that have indirect impact and their need to also take part in the financing of nature credits is very, very interesting. And I agreed with it in full, because as we've already discussed, often right now, the money that goes into nature conservation and biodiversity, even on a voluntary basis, is from the people who not only own the lands but also take care of it. So forest owners, farmers, land managers in large. And in regards to this, and to the remarks made from Axel as well, I think PEFC, the certification schemes that are existing both for private forest owners and for companies, is a really, really interesting scheme to look upon, because it gives us an indication that there is sustainability measures already being framed on a voluntary basis. And that gives us an implication, at least, that there should be an interest also in having a bigger market for this. Not saying that this should be the single framework that we build upon for new and new markets or new systems, such as the nature credits, but it at least gives us some sort of direction, and seeing that this is possible. I also think that it's very, very interesting that the Commission is asking themselves if this is something that we need to legislate about. And Jessica made a very good, I think, comment on that there is certain great possibilities with having an EU framework, but we need to be very careful on how to frame that. And I think we all agree that nature credits, no matter how we frame them, have a possibility of disrupting also the actions that we take if we frame them too loosely or too direct. And here, of course, we're talking both about the locality of them and the time frame. But I think there are several actually interlinkages with other legislation that we can make here. For example, the like for like principle that we have in the carbon framework directive or framework is really interesting here, because there are smaller measures that you can take, maybe not for forest owners, but for farmers, in having making space for songbirds or planting flowers or stuff like that, that are very, very narrow in time scale, but could have a measurable outcome or beneficial outcome for biodiversity in the short term. But when talking about forestry, we need to take a much longer perspective. And it's just good to know that all of us are having those sort of like timeframes or thinking about that. Lastly, I just want to underline that even though this is a very technical thing that we're talking about, and that there are many risks, nature credits should be seen as an opportunity, not only for our nature but for the bioeconomy at large. And I believe that the key is just that, to the system, that both would be beneficiaries, and we have to build a system where both nature and bioeconomy can benefit from this.
Thank you, Anna. That was a really nice summary. I think from my perspective, I have learned a lot from these discussions, and I really thank Axel and Jessica for their insights and sharing openly in this discussion. We really need to see nature credits as an opportunity, as you just said, Anna, about biodiversity as an asset rather than a risk, and how we best make the business case for that. We now have a new approach, a bottom-up approach of developing a framework. Whether it's light or heavy remains to be seen. But I think both Axel and Jessica was quite clear that there needs to be some overarching principles or criteria, and then perhaps more methodologies and the actual measurements being developed locally, nationally, or at the regional level. So these are some of the takeaway message that at least I made this afternoon. And we now will wrap up. So Kaisa.
Thank you. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to everybody watching for participating to this afternoon together with us. This was all from Would Be Better this year. We wish everybody a very happy Christmas holidays and nice time. And also, please join us next time in the spring. We're going to be hosting our next Would Be Better event together with the MEP Per Holmgren from the Green Group. Thank you very much and take care.
Happy Christmas.
Vet du.